How's it going, everyone? Chaos Prime here, and we are back with another video. This is part 2 of the video. I'm hoping to be able to finish this in this part 2, so hopefully we'll be able to get through this and be happy days. So if you did enjoy this video or the previous video, please do consider leaving a like, subscribe. It really does mean the world to me. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subs so I can get my partnership for YouTube out the way. It would mean the world and really help me to not only get better equipment and better cameras, better mics. It would just go a long way in being able to help me support and make the content better. So thanks so much for your continued support. Let's get this show continuing on the road. All right, so it says here, all of that Hines testimony is not going to serve as a smoking gun for the FTC either. He takes more time to reflect before he answers, unlike Matt Booty, who was always quick, but there hasn't been a gotcha moment regarding exclusivity decisions. And now this was basically, unlike Matt Booty, who was answering them quite relatively quickly in regards to just shutting down the FTC, Peter Hines was actually doing this differently. He actually was giving more methodical approaches, still shutting down the FTC quite regularly and correcting the FTC in their legal approach, because even then they didn't understand the market, they didn't understand how things worked. So they actually were, like when they spoke to Matt Booty about putting Halo on the Switch, they were saying, how would that actually work? And he was explaining that, it wouldn't be 4K. And the FTC was like, why wouldn't it be 4K? Like, how stupid are you? Like, literally. And the FTC was like, well, it's not going to be the same experience as the Xbox version or the PC version. And they're saying, you're going to have to make sacrifices. And Matt Booty at the time was immediate, like instantaneous, turning around and saying, we would have to make sacrifices. That's true. Textures would be lowered, enemy textures would be lowered, maybe even enemy counts would be lowered, but the resolution would be lowered. But what we would try to maintain is the core feel of the game. As long as the core of the game remains the same, then that experience that we want to get out on the Xbox can be reflected on the Switch. That is to say, it will be a lot of work and a lot of trial, a lot of optimization, but it's not out of the question. Will it run 60 FPS? Probably not. It's going to be a 30 FPS console, but it is a 30 FPS console. So, and even then the FTC was like, well, why can't it run at the same fidelity as Xbox? And I'm like, even I would have loved to see his face when these sorts of questions were coming at him, but when it came to Peter Hines, he was doing it completely. His approach was really different. But he also confirmed that, when it came to certain games, like Deathloop and which did really, really well, but Ghostwire Tokyo didn't do as well. Sony was extremely happy with not only the performance of the game, the sales, and the awards it won. They were just overly happy, and they had no problems. They even reached out and thanked them for their service. It's important to keep in mind, normally mergers are allowed and blocking decisions are an exception. The FTC has to show why this merger is quite so egregious that it must be blocked. So far, I honestly can't see a strong reason for that based on what we hear, is what Florian is saying. And having listened to the whole thing today from 4:30 to 10 o'clock, I pretty much, what was that, 6 hours? I have to say that I agree with him. The FTC had no rebuttal, nothing. Now, the FTC came to Mr. Hines and was like, well, why is Starfield a Xbox exclusive? And Peter Hines said, well, it's not an Xbox exclusive, it's an Xbox ecosystem exclusive, which means it's also on PC. And that doesn't mean it's going to be on the Windows Store, only it's on Steam as well, which is a different market entirely. It's just not on PlayStation. And so they were asking, well, why is this? What didn't this affect you? We've seen videos where you've been upset regarding and sympathetic to the community. And he goes, I was, but at the end of the day, when we found out that we had one less platform to work with, we were overjoyed because it just meant, you know, we could actually get this game out easier. He said, you know, considering how big and complicated and vast Starfield is, the complexities alone, adding one extra platform would have been crazy having to optimize for that. By not having to do that, not only were we able to get a better experience, a better running game, a smooth experience, but we're also able to get it out. If we had to add the PlayStation version, there is no way that game would have released in the next 9 weeks. It probably would have needed at least another year. And that, he said, was, you know, these are all factors that come into play, and our developers were actually pretty happy at the fact that one platform was removed, because it just meant it's less for them to optimize. And that's the key here for them. It was asked to them whether they had any how they felt about the fact that the games are going to go day one on Game Pass, and that their games aren't going to get the sales numbers. It's not going to sell 1 million copies or 10 million copies, and how they felt about that. And their response was that, you know, the Game Pass platform is actually really exciting. At this point, they don't have to care about what games, you know, whether their games sell or not. All they care about right now is how many people are going to play the creations that they make. They're getting paid regardless, right? And Microsoft is going to hopefully get their money through additional subscriptions to the service. So it's a win-win situation. But as far as they're concerned, instead of the game being available and being played by 1 million people, the potential for the game to be played now by 30 million people is really high, because every single one of those Game Pass subscribers now has access to the game. And that, for them, is a joy, because the more people playing your creation, the better, right? Then the conversation turned towards Indiana Jones, and Judge Corley asked Peter Hines about why they amended the agreement with Disney regarding Indiana Jones. Now, this was a really contentious point, because at the end of the day, the FTC really went after them with this one and said, look, this game was multi-platform, the client wanted it multi-platform. Why did you, and you agreed to it as well before the acquisition, but why post-acquisition did you change it? Clearly, this is another sign of Microsoft telling you that, you know, the game has to be Xbox exclusive. And Peter Hines explained why they signed the original deal, which essentially was that they're a small independent company, right? Bethesda wasn't, you know, they're not the size of Microsoft, they're not the size of Sony, they're not the size of Nintendo. They're not, you know, the size of, like, say, Gabe's Steam. They're not a big company. They never were. As far as they're concerned, they were a small independent company. And when a big company like Disney comes along, they can bully you around, and you can't really say no. And trust me, from experience with the company I'm working for in a digital agency, I experience this all the time. When a much bigger company comes along, they dictate everything. So when it came to the fact that they wanted the game on every single platform, Bethesda couldn't say no. They just couldn't. They didn't have the backbone to do it. But after they, you know, became part of Microsoft and they gained that backbone, well, at that point they could go back and say, hey, buddy, we need to talk, because remember how you were bullying us around back then with Indiana Jones? Well, now we need to change the deal now. And at that point, they were dropping a platform. Now, had the Series S been, say, I don't know, a Nintendo platform or a Ouya platform or a Stadia platform, whatever, just basically something else, a Sega platform, whatever, I think that probably would have been dropped instead of the PlayStation. But as the Series S and X are pretty much joined at the hip, they dropped the PlayStation platform. Take that as you will. I think it was a little dodge personally, but the idea here is, again, is to streamline development. And more developers are doing this. We see this with Final Fantasy 16. We saw this with Forspoken, where third-party developers are picking a platform to specialize in so they can streamline development, make the best game possible, and release it. Of course, over the past 4 or 5 years, that's not been the case, with games being buggy, broken, unfinished, unpolished. But the premise is still there, and we're starting to see that more and more as games are getting more complex, more detailed, harder to develop, longer development cycles, and the longer those development cycles go, the more there is a need to streamline the game for one specific platform. Otherwise, it will just take even longer for them to release that game. Then the FTC had a few more questions for him, but he answered in a really, really nice way. He shut them down on almost every single question. The FTC tried to play smart and actually throw some technical jargon at him and show that they knew what they were talking about. And even then, he turned around and pretty much told them that you have literally no idea what you're saying or what you're talking about, because what you're saying is false. That is not how game development works. That is not how this business works. That is not how this industry works, and you are wrong. And the FTC lawyer was like, okay, swiftly moving on. Then Sarah Bond came on, and she was explaining who she is and what she does. Explains how 50% of the people who played Human Fall Flat are thanks to Game Pass, who hadn't previously played a puzzle game, and because they played that, they actually went on to try other puzzle games, and that was the Game Pass effect. They were discussing the different models of Game Pass and how xCloud as part of Game Pass Ultimate is being used more as a feature. Now, through their testing, through their analytics, instead of people basically using xCloud as a means to actually play games, it was used as a feature where more people are still buying games on Xbox, apparently. Figures and facts are showing this, and they were able to show this as well, I believe. But what it showed is that people are using xCloud as a try before you buy, and as they're actually buying the game, obviously there's that whole download process because it's a digital game, and during that time they're using the xCloud to just, if the game is cloud enabled, to play the game while it's downloading. And the FTC asked, how long does the game take? And they said, well, it depends on the size, your bandwidth. And they said, well, give us a ballpark figure. Like, the FTC doesn't even know what the internet even is. And so she gave him a figure of 2 hours, and they're like, oh, 2 hours. Wow. And it's like, well, what? You literally have no idea what you're talking about. It got really bad at one point. Sarah Bond is the most confident one of the three witnesses. She absolutely dominated the FTC. The FTC was trying to pick holes in everything she said, referring back to legal documents that she signed, and even those she was able to spin and turn in her favor. The FTC just could not catch a break. She was fantastic, and as it says here, came across very authentic and convincing, and she absolutely was. To be fair, it's obviously easier to be comfortable when explaining how the market works and what the products are about than to have to answer questions about past emails, interviews that the FTC tries to leverage for its purpose. And that was the other thing, right? The FTC was like looking through past emails where things were said in internal comms, and we're basically trying to use those against Matt Booty and Peter Hines to gain those brownie points. And honestly, as low blow as they were, I get why they were doing it, but it's pretty sad that the FTC had to, because they don't have a case, they had to go that low in order to actually try and come up with something, anything that they could have that gotcha moment, but they never could. Even coming down to explaining the market definition and what first party and third party were, they failed in that historically too. The proceedings should continue shortly. And as I say here, let's see when we come back. Sarah Bond is now explaining what COD is about, because apparently they didn't know. It went down a really weird path at one point, and now explaining the difficulties of working out an agreement with Activision regarding COD. Microsoft wanted, before the acquisition, wanted COD to go on the Game Pass, but, the negotiations about revenue were so absurd that it just wasn't something that they could come to an agreement with. And as far as Activision were concerned, they didn't even want it on the cloud. But if you offered them enough money, ludicrous amounts of money, maybe they might have been convinced, but even then, it's just not financially feasible. there were very clear limits as to what Xbox was able to do with COD for market purposes due to Activision's agreement with Sony. And this is something that happened in the trial where the tables turned, and the FTC, I'm pretty sure, were not happy when Microsoft's lawyers turned the tables on Sony, the one that the FTC is actually protecting. And, you know, it got real dark real quick. You know, a year ago, Xbox could not show COD on Xbox on YouTube. The rule was about platforms where there were customers who didn't have an Xbox yet. In other words, they could show it only to places where the audience was basically Xbox only. So if the audience where you were showing it wasn't Xbox only, i.e. the Xbox dashboard, Microsoft were not allowed to show that this game existed on the Xbox. And what does this mean? Well, the average consumer will look at that, play it first on PlayStation. Best place to play this Call of Duty, PlayStation. Exclusive early beta access, PlayStation. Play this on PlayStation now. Yada, yada, yada. The average consumer will see that and just assume that Call of Duty is not available on Xbox, because not a single word regarding Xbox was allowed to be branded outside of the Xbox circle on any medium at all. But again, the FTC was pretty much okay with this because it's defending Sony PlayStation. They say it was not possible to use it for showcase purposes in presentations like the Xbox showcases. Their own website and similar Xbox specific channels were okay. So that was pretty much the only places that they could use it on, right? Sony, so, you know, it was just weird. But that's what marketing rights are. You basically get the marketing right to exclude your competition. And this is why when that email that got leaked, oh, we want to put PlayStation out of business. Well, newsflash, buddy. Sony want to put Microsoft out of business. It's literally their wet dream. This is what they live for. This is what they strive for. So Sony imposed restrictions, and Xbox always had to find out from Activision what exactly they were able to do. A Sony agreement with Activision limited the ways in which Xbox was able to reference or show COD for marketing purposes. This is the behavior of a company seeking to cement its dominant market position. Why is the FTC supporting Sony in light of those hard facts? It's crazy, says Muller. And I agree with him, and so does the court. I think everyone there agreed with the fact that the FTC was being a bit weird in supporting a practice that basically removed competition. And they're supposed to be all about competition, but they're really not. What they're there for is to stop big tech and give them a bad day. Unless the FTC's cross-examination of Sarah Bond results in a surprise, which it absolutely didn't, the FTC, which is failing in connection with this case, its mission statement of protecting American consumers has lost the first round. It badly needed to win it. And it did. Sarah Bond, if Peter Hines and Matt Booty were shaky, and they were at times, right? They redeemed themselves with the Microsoft cross-examination, but they were shaky when the FTC was examining them. But Sarah Bond, my God, she smashed it out of the park and pretty much took a home run. The purpose of the agreement with Nintendo was to emphasize Microsoft's commitment to a cross-platform availability of COD, but the FTC still insisted that there is no way you can get COD running on the Nintendo Switch. That is not true. If worst case scenario, they can run it through the cloud, like they have with other games. It is still possible, but the FTC is still adamant, saying no. Then the conversation turned to Valve and how Valve basically said that they're not interested in signing a 10-year deal because they believe in Microsoft and they don't feel that Microsoft has any incentive to remove the game off Steam. And they're totally right. Of course, the FTC also argued, which was really funny, that the Valve Steam is not the biggest PC marketplace client. I assume they were referring to Epic being at the size of Steam, or GOG being at the size of Steam. Are these people mental? I swear they must be smoking something or on some magic mushrooms, because It's just like, you what, mate? It was starting to get really dumb. Sarah Bond explains why Valve didn't sign a 10-year deal, how they believed in Microsoft. Now talking about GeForce Now and the fact that COD is not available on GeForce Now right now, but it could be if the deal goes through, which means that the millions and millions and millions of people that have access to GeForce Now could play Call of Duty right now over the cloud without having to buy an expensive PC or a console. And that's the key point here, right? It's still a delivery system, especially in situations like GeForce Now. You still have to buy the game. You still have to buy the game and play it through. And if you play it through the cloud, you can play it on the platform of your choice where GeForce Now is available, including your TV. This really is a total disaster for the FTC, which is actually trying to deprive gamers of those additional access, content options. And Judge Corley actually noticed that putting this on services like GeForce Now will enable more people to play it, and they were kind of dubious as to what the FTC is arguing here and protecting Sony, which shares that objective, while Microsoft is here and explaining how to bring more games to more platforms. I meant more games to more platforms. Rapid live tweeting is a typo. Okay. Sarah Bond, in fact, we have already launched Xbox games on NVIDIA GeForce Now in response to the question of whether it will happen. Because the FTC said, well, will this ever happen? Are you ever going to put games on GeForce Now? Is this, is this all talk with you guys? And Sarah Bond said, we've already done it. It's there. There's no problems. We are planning on expanding the library, and we are planning on putting, access to the games through Game Pass as well, but it's there. And we are working with NVIDIA to make it better. And then they said, well, do you have this agreement with the other streaming platforms? And she said, yes. They're also getting Xbox games without the deal going through. They're also getting it. And FTC was, hey buddy, do you have a smoke bomb? Because that was a mic drop moment, and I think we should just call it a day. Because yeah, I think we just got schooled, buddy. Sarah Bond just completely and utterly schooled us, and that's pretty much what happened. She completely ruined them. The FTC now cross-examining Sarah again. The FTC spoke about the 70-30 split. The standard split that you get with Apple, Google, Sony PlayStation, Xbox, Steam. The only one that I know that doesn't do a 70-30 split is Epic Games, and good on them for that as well. The FTC asks about third-party games, but before I get into this, they were asking about the 70-30 split, and they said, well, look at it over here. You said that in extreme circumstances, you can actually get a better deal if you really want that on there. And she's like, well, no, that's not the only time this applies. It can apply to that, but it can also apply in other situations. Like if we fully fund the game, which is leading on to this point here, we will provide a better revenue return as well for the people and for the developers. And the FTC asks about third-party games that are 100% funded by Microsoft, but Sarah Bond clarifies that those games are not third-party games. They are first-party. And the FTC struggled to understand this concept, right? What Sarah Bond was saying is, if we are paying for 100% of the development cost and are funding the game 100%, that is no longer a third-party game and should not be on the rival platform. That is a first-party game because we are funding it. And the FTC was still confused at that notion and saying why it should also be on PlayStation. I mean, you don't see them arguing about Stellar Blade, which is 100% funded by Sony, coming on Xbox now, do you? That's an exclusive to Sony PlayStation because it was funded by PlayStation. You didn't see Street Fighter V going to Xbox because that was funded by Sony and it became a Sony exclusive. So why should a game, a third-party game that's 100% funded by Microsoft, go to PlayStation? This is ludicrous. The FTC completely has lost the plot and is I just don't understand what Sony has on them. Maybe Sony has like naked pictures of Lena Khan and is threatening to show it to her family or something. I don't know, but they have to have something on the FTC, because the way the FTC was defending Sony and their market position is ludicrous and crazy for, you know, the FTC, who's all about fair trade and competition. They were basically trying to eradicate the competition. They were even arguing with Microsoft, as I said either earlier in this video or the previous video, that Xbox exclusives should be on PlayStation as well, but not the other way around. Like, are they out of their mind? The FTC brought up the clause about anticipated or unforeseeable circumstances, which was addressed here. Essentially, if something really bad happens, maybe cloud collapses or an unforeseeable situation happens where Nvidia is losing money or Microsoft is losing money, the option to renegotiate their terms is available. But that clause is, you know, unique and may never actually be enacted. The FTC now is focusing on the agreement with GeForce Now. They were really focusing on GeForce Now about when to make an announcement, with the exact date determined by Microsoft. Wants to know if it's a typical clause. Sarah Bond said, sometimes we do put them in a contract. Then they took a little break and they came back, which lasted about another 2 minutes. Just a quick clarification by Sarah Bond on the redirect regarding how cloud streaming Xbox games works. And she basically had to explain to them how the cloud gaming worked, playing it on your mobile, on your tablet, on your TV, and, you know, how the whole structure worked and how it was different to, say, downloading a native game on the App Store, which actually is advertised on the App Store, whereas individual games are not allowed to be advertised in the App Store for xCloud. So it's even visibility was gone. And that's where the case ended for today. Sarah Bond completely schooled, you know, just completely owned them. It just means they don't want Nvidia to spoil or do a game announcement before they are ready. Seems to be a normal for all companies. Everyone knows where there was nothing to go on by, but yeah, it was crazy how this was actually going on, and I'm actually quite happy with the way. Unlike Peter Hines and Matt Booty, who struggled at the beginning, Sarah Bond, my god, she lived up to that Bond name, man. She absolutely destroyed them. I mean, this is pretty much Sarah Bond, and that was the FTC. Every single question that they put to her, she completely poked holes in their questions and just completely ruined them. It was as accurate as you're gonna get. She just completely destroyed them. I'm guessing that, and this was the FTC wanted Sarah Bond there. I'm guessing they regretted that decision very, very quickly. It was certainly more than clarification. It was Sarah Bond saying xCloud loses Microsoft money when people use it. That's a huge fact. And this is actually true. This was another thing that the judge actually wanted clarification on. And they proved that when people use xCloud, Microsoft is losing money. They are making money, but they lose more than they make because of the way the servers are run, because they're using actual Xbox consoles and not just server data centers, which is a big, big thing. Very impressed with Bond, stayed calm, direct, answered with calculated responses. I'm sure she was coached, but being coached and using the coaching and understand is two different things. I've been in those shoes and I can tell you it's not always easy. And yeah, this is obviously ludicrous, but the FTC was so bad today, it is almost suspicious. I knew a lot of them didn't agree with Lena on the block and almost feels like an intentional tank to try to get her out. They are professionals though, and I doubt that's the case. It was just odd. I mean, they were terrible today. They were really, really bad. The FTC right now, the FTC were all over the place, and even Sarah Bond was laughing at a few of their questions because it didn't make sense. And that was the other thing, right? Their questions, they were asking questions, and the judge at one point turned around and said, where are you going with this? Because there doesn't seem to be an answer that can fit your question. And then they were like looking, apparently they were looking around each other, and they didn't know. The lawyers didn't know. They're looking around again. Oh my God. FTC, to no surprise. Oh no, we suck again. They were really bad today. They started off really well. Like, they started off fantastic. But, you know, as it went on, they went bad. Well, this has actually gone on for 30 minutes now, and I think I'm going to stop there. But you get the hint, you get the drift. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. Hopefully tomorrow's trial won't be as long, so we can get everything down into, you know, a bite size of like 15, maybe 20 minutes for the whole thing. But this was such a big thing with 3 different witnesses. Hoping tomorrow's isn't going to be as many witnesses, because the cross-examinations were long. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Let's have that discussion, and I'll see you next time. Remain legend.